Good morning to everyone, here physically or remotely, those that are following us on streaming. The Spanish Federation of Associations, Centers and Clubs for the UNESCO presents this event together with the Cultura de Paz Foundation and the Spanish National Association for Collaboration with the UNESCO, urgently calling the peoples of the world and commemorating the 75th anniversary of the foundation of United Nations and UNESCO. Its aim is to create awareness about disasters and war in civil society. The foundation, La Caixa, it is a pleasure to collaborate with this event, and we in this auditorium on the 21st of September will also celebrate the International Day of Peace, and the title will be A Civil Society, a Pillar for Peace. On the 21st of September, it should have been the 16th of November last year, but the 21st of September, right here, we will present to the media, companies, institutions, private and public, social actors and players, national and international, the work that the associations, centers and clubs for UNESCO have been doing in disseminating the values of UNESCO through education, science and culture, communication also and information, and have also made people aware of how important the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda are. Welcome to all of you and have a fruitful day. I am sure it will be. Thank you.
¿Me llevo esto, Alberto?
Buenos días.
Good morning. Thank you, Director of the Caixa Foundation in Madrid, for your welcoming words. On behalf of La Caixa, Mr. Federico Mayor Zaragoza, President of the Culture for Peace Foundation, the Secretary of the International Secretariat for Cooperation with UNESCO, the Ambassador of Spain at UNESCO, Mr. Francisco Pérez Esteban, representing the Secretary of State for the 2030 Agenda, Mr. Jaime Ruiz, President of the Committee for Truth, Mr. Zarzal, Director of the Miguel Ángel Zarzal from the University Carlos III of Madrid, and to everybody else, the media, national, international organizations and associations, and people that are connected remotely, friends, thank you for being here. We, the peoples of the earth, with this introduction, the Charter of the UN, established on the 24th of October 1945 an ambitious and noble goal to preserve for future generations from war, reaffirm faith in fundamental rights, dignity and the value of human beings, the equality and between men and women, conditions for justice, respect, and compliance with international treaties, promotion of social progress and quality of life within an atmosphere of freedom. And based on all this, it has practiced tolerance and peaceful coexistence. We have joined together to maintain peace internationally, to promote economic and social development of all peoples. However, today, 75 years, almost 76 years later, skepticism is growing all over the world in terms of the value of multilateralism, and the UN and UNESCO must make an effort to continue to be relevant and efficient, especially to the peoples themselves. UNESCO was created on the 16th of November 1945 as an institution of the UN and has been involving several players in their work in order to maximize the mediums that are needed to comply with their mission and contribute to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the 17 Millennium Goals. The advantage of the UNESCO is that it has the ability to create a true culture of associations throughout civil society at all levels. And in tight cooperation with the national committees of the UNESCO, it has for 75 years made efforts to establish a range of associations and networks all over the world, which today are one of its most important assets and which is also known as the UNESCO family in the 193 member states, including associations, centres and clubs for UNESCO in Spain. The Spanish Federation of Association Centres and Clubs for UNESCO, which I have the honour to preside, was created on the 22nd October 1966 to share the ideals of UNESCO and disseminate them in society. Its aims are to contribute to the implementation of these ideals, the maintenance of security and peace all over the world, guaranteeing respect for justice, human rights, and fundamental rights in the UN Charter, which recognizes all peoples of the world without distinction of race, sex, language, or anything else. This Spanish association has organized for the 21st of September of this year, with the collaboration of the Foundation, Culture for Peace Foundation, the National Association of Spain for collaboration with UNESCO, and has organized this under the title Civil Society, a Fundamental Pillar for Peace. And I'm going to give you the agenda of that day. We will have in the morning here in this foundation, this auditorium, a welcoming words by Mr. Isidro Jaineg, President of the La Caixa Foundation and of the Spanish chapter of the Club of Rome. The inauguration will be done by Miguel Ángel Marzal, Professor and Vice Dean at the Carlos III University of Madrid. After the inauguration, through the Spanish Federation of Centres and Clubs, and the Culture for Peace Foundation and the National Spanish Committee for UNESCO. After that, we will have the presentation from Mr. Antonio Uterre, General Secretary, and Mrs. Azurey, Director of the UNESCO. We'll have representatives of the Government of Spain, and after a break, we will have one of the first discussions of the morning. Multilateral governance, presided over by Mr. Miguel Ángel Moratinos from Alliances for Civilizations. We will have Nobel Peace Prize personalities, the President of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Dean of the University for Peace of the UN, the President of the European Centre for Peace and Development, and the President of the Foundation for the Advancement of Science. In the afternoon, the first panel discussion will be about civil participation in the 2030 Agenda, presented by Mr. Carlos Jiménez from the Autonomous University of Madrid. Speakers will include the Secretary of State for 2030 and the Director of CIFAL Malaga, the UN office in Malaga, and the Mayor of Fundao. Fundao is the village where the Secretary of the UN was born, actually. The President of APATH and former Director of Culture for UNESCO, Miguel Ángel Manquisidor, who's a member of the Committee of Social and Cultural Rights of the UN, who will give us a review of the civil network of UNESCO, including centres, associations, associated schools, and everything else, to give us a full view of the civil network of UNESCO. After that, there'll be another presentation by Mr. Benet Jacob, who's from UNESCO and will be entitled From Civil Society to the Future. And the next and last presentation will be presided over by Carmen Magallón, President of the Foundation for Peace Research. The speakers will be from the UN, the President of the Movement for Peace, Mr. Federico Mayor Zaragoza, President of the Culture for Peace Foundation. And the closing will be done by Mr. Andrés Perello, Delegate Ambassador of Spain at UNESCO, and I will also say a few words. And that 21st of September will end with a symphony for a better world, orchestra and choirs by Juan Antonio Simar, composer. And the next session will give you even more details about all this fascinating event. Thank you very much.
Buenos días.
Good morning. People who are here in the room and who have joined us remotely, authorities, my dear friends, it is my task to begin introducing the speakers in this event who will be a part of the panel discussion. I'm going to give you the history of each and every one of them. But when I looked into all these details, I realized that the information was too detailed, and I'm going to only give you some highlights about the speakers that we have with us today. I begin with Isabel Fuentes, biological scientist, studied at Madrid Autonomous University, and it has struck me that she is doctor in museology, natural sciences, and human sciences. She's worked at the Center, the National Museum for Natural Science, where she has a virtual reality event set up, which is magnificent. She has been at the Residencia de Estudiantes in Madrid. She directed the Cosmo Caixa Museum in Alcobendas, Madrid, and her perspective is always digital and what digital reality projects, and its relation to the future. The next speaker is Leticia Pico de Coaña, who is also involved in digital continuity, and she is the Secretary General of the Spanish National Committee of Cooperation with the UNESCO. She's a diplomat. She's studied political science at the Complutense University of Madrid. She has been working at consulates in different countries, and she also been in charge of culture and scientific relations between different institutions. She has worked for different agencies and entities, and obviously she is the right person to tell us about something which we're so interested in, which is the 2030 Agenda and other projects of our country. The third speaker is Mr. Alberto Guerrero, industrial engineer, and he's a member of the European Federation of Engineering. He's an expert on systems. I studied humanities, so a lot of this is double Dutch to me. when they talk about science and systems and all this, but he's a great expert on that. And I have to tell you that the most striking thing today is that Mr. Guerrero has been a great teacher at secondary school. I think it was professional occupational training school. So his experience as a teacher adds value to his perception of things. And education today is more important than ever. So we have somebody who knows a bit about that, and he's also president of the FECU Education Institution, and he is a very, very relevant interlocutor and speaker today. Finally, last but not least, we have Mr. Federico Mayor. You all know he's a chemist, professor of chemistry, and he has a long history of honors and positions. He is especially relevant and important today because we are urgently calling all the peoples of the earth. And Professor Mayor Zaragoza's viewpoint is very important. He was for 12 years director at UNESCO of the cultural program, and he has been serving peace and struggling for peace and culture. He created the culture for peace program, human rights, democracy, dialogue between cultures. So we can expect and he announced different strategies during his time at the UNESCO. Different meetings were organized, and the General Assembly of the UN in 1999 approved the declaration and the action plan for culture for peace. And since the year 2000, he has been involved at the foundation doing extraordinary work about having to do with this. And he created the Demos Paz Institute, Let Us Give Peace Institute. So this is going to be a great meeting, and I've spoken about the people that are going to be involved in this panel discussion, and now we need a calling card. You can see the first one on the screen. The website is unbelievably lovely, wonderful, and on that website you can see, you'll be able to watch the video that I want to present to you. And I must only say that it's a magnificent calling card, and you will be able to, we will see two people who are involved in this. Mr. Alberto Guerrero, who you'll see on the video, speaks about space and the environment, what FECU is, what the centers are. FECU in Spain, the FECU, and will also tell us more about the event on the 21st of September. And Mr. Federico Mayor Zaragoza will present the players to us. And they are naturally, we are obviously the players that are involved in all this process. and we are working for peoples in an inclusive manner, and this will allow us as individuals to project our voice and our activity further. I will now leave it here and pass the floor to let you see the video that I've just mentioned, which we're going to see now.
La Federación Española de Asociaciones, Centros y Clubs para la UNESCO, que tengo el honor de presidir, FECU, fue constituida el 22 de octubre de 1986, hace hoy 35 años, con el fin de contribuir a los ideales de la UNESCO y dados a conocer por medio de la educación, la ciencia, la cultura, la comunicación y la información, garantizando con ello el respeto a la justicia, a los derechos humanos y a las libertades fundamentales de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, que reconoce a todos los pueblos de la tierra sin distinción de raza, sexo, idioma o religión. La FECU actúa como órgano de cooperación y coordinación de las actividades que realiza los centros y clubes UNESCO de España con las distintas federaciones europeas y mundial, formando parte de la red civil de la UNESCO, juntamente con la red de geoparques, reserva de la biosfera, cátedras y escuelas asociadas. Son asociaciones sin ánimo de lucro y de carácter voluntario, acreditadas por la Comisión Nacional Española de Cooperación con la UNESCO, que declara entre sus fines la difusión de los principios originarios de la Fundación de las Naciones Unidas y de la UNESCO, que tuvo lugar respectivamente el 24 de octubre y 16 de noviembre de 1945, como se reconoce en sus dos cartas fundacionales. Igualmente, en el preámbulo de la Carta Fundacional de la UNESCO se nos recuerda que, puesto que las guerras nacen en la mente de los hombres, es en la mente de los hombres donde deben dirigirse los baluartes de la paz. Consciente la Federación Española de que en 2020 se ha cumplido el 75 aniversario de la fundación de estas dos organizaciones internacionales, acordó preparar un acto conmemorativo para el 16 de noviembre del pasado año, que tuvo que ser aplazado debido a la situación sanitaria provocada por la pandemia y pospuesto al 21 de septiembre de 2021, Día Internacional de la Paz, con el título La sociedad civil, pilar fundamental hacia la paz, que tendrá lugar en el Auditorium CaixaForum de Madrid, con la intervención del secretario general de Naciones Unidas, la directora general de la UNESCO, el Gobierno de España, varios premios Nobel de la Paz, así como otras personalidades nacionales e internacionales. El acto, que está siendo organizado por la Federación Española de Centros, la Fundación Cultura de Paz y la Comisión Nacional Española de Cooperación con la UNESCO, con la colaboración de la Fundación La Caixa, Escuela Diplomática y la Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. Los centros y clubes son testigos fieles, aliados desde el principio del entusiasmo y de los ideales de la UNESCO, que nacieron de la necesidad de implicar más allá de la acción de los gobiernos a los ciudadanos y a la sociedad civil en la construcción de una paz duradera, promoviendo la solidaridad intelectual y moral de la humanidad, a la vez que se han ido afianzando como socios de gran valor y contribuyendo a la difusión de los principios y objetivos de la UNESCO. Estos centros y clubes representan para la UNESCO una magnífica vía de acceso a la población de todas las regiones del mundo y constituyen un colectivo que demuestra la necesidad de asociar a los ciudadanos con la opinión pública a favor de nuestras prioridades. Con todo ello, la sociedad civil, formada por estos centros y clubs para la UNESCO, constituye un fenómeno característico del tiempo que vivimos, hasta el punto de poder afirmar que son una ciudadanía activa para los valores de la UNESCO. Finalizo indicando que el próximo día 29 de junio, en CaixaForum de Madrid, tendrá lugar la presentación oficial del acto del 21 de septiembre a los medios de comunicación, empresas, instituciones patrocinadoras y la sociedad civil en general. Muchas gracias.
es tiempo de acción. Ya tenemos los diagnósticos, ahora tienen que venir los tratamientos y además tienen que venir con urgencia, mirando a los ojos de nuestros hijos y de nuestros descendientes. Ahora, ¿quién puede producir los cambios que son tan importantes y radicales y apremiantes? Nosotros los pueblos. Así es como empieza la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Nosotros los pueblos hemos resuelto evitar a las generaciones venideras el horror de la guerra. Pues ahora tenemos que decir lo mismo. Ahora tenemos que decir nosotros los pueblos vamos a evitar que nuestro legado intergeneracional sea la de una tierra, la de una habitabilidad deteriorada. Y para eso lo que tenemos que hacer es darnos cuenta de que ahora por primera vez en la historia tenemos voz. Los pueblos ya tienen voz. Y además ya no somos solo hombres, ya somos hombres y mujeres, todos los seres humanos iguales en dignidad. Este es el gran, yo creo, el gran triunfo que hemos logrado últimamente. Ahora ya podemos decir, sí, nosotros los pueblos, estos pueblos que eran temerosos, silenciosos, silenciados, estos pueblos que eran unos pueblos que estaban aislados, desconectados, ahora, gracias a la tecnología digital, ya pueden expresarse, ya tenemos voz. Ha habido tantos llamamientos a la inteligencia, ha habido tantos llamamientos a que hiciéramos las cosas bien hechas. Ahora ya podemos. Y por eso yo creo que es muy importante que haya este llamamiento apremiante de la Federación Española de Centros UNESCO, para que nos digan, hace 75, ahora ya 76 años, que esta creación del multilateralismo democrático, de nosotros los pueblos, hizo posible precisamente que hubiera esperanza. Ahora esta esperanza es renovada. Ahora ya podemos, sí, ahora ya podemos pensar en que vamos a poder intervenir hacia un multilateralismo democrático, hacia un nuevo concepto de seguridad, hacia un nuevo sistema económico. Ahora ya podemos, sí, ahora ya podemos hacer esta propuesta. Ahora ya podemos hacerlo poniendo en práctica precisamente estos objetivos de desarrollo sostenible propios de la Agenda 2030 que fueron aprobados en la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas en el mes de noviembre del año 2015. Tengo que subrayar, además, que los grandes retos de la humanidad en este momento, algunos de ellos son procesos irreversibles. Ustedes se dan cuenta, ahora ya tenemos voz, pero tenemos unos desafíos globales irreversibles sobre la ecología, sobre la propia salud, sobre la educación. Es que es cierto, la alimentación. Ustedes se pueden imaginar lo que esto representa. Por todo ello, es necesario que seamos, sobre todo las comunidades académica, científica, artística, que sean los estudiantes, que sean los centros educativos, las universidades, que sean las uniones empresariales, las uniones de trabajadores, que sean todos aquellos que forman parte del sistema de Naciones Unidas, de la UNESCO. Todos están en estos momentos llamados. Yo hago un llamamiento especial a los deportistas famosos que pueden arrastrar a mucha gente, a los artistas, a los escritores, a todos ellos estamos en estos momentos convocados. Si no, nuestro legado podría ser irreversiblemente afectado. Han pasado ya 6 años. Ahora tenemos que correr. Ahora, delito de silencio. Si callamos, si nadie da a este llamamiento el impulso y la rapidez que se merece, nuestros hijos, nuestros nietos, nos podrían recordar con aquella frase terrible de Albert Camus que a mí me gusta repetir. Les despreciamos porque podían y no se atrevieron.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. This is the video I talked to you about. As you can see, it is a wonderful introduction. I want to mention that there are two great presenters in our midst, as you have seen. In absentia, we also have yet another one, and it is worth mentioning that here we have the message that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sent. We congratulate him for his recent re-election, and in a very brief but significant and full of enthusiasm email, he gave his full support to this initiative and confirmed he was aware of this session today and the outlook on what may come on September 21st. So within that context, we thank the Secretary General for his support. You've seen now on this video a brief mention on what's happening, and I want to announce that as of 5 p.m. we'll be able to attend the projection of an extraordinary documentary. The documentary is called A Light in the Darkness. It was directed by José María Borrell, and the main character is María Borrell, his daughter. I could see it back in January when Filomena, the storm was still, giving us a hard time. And so through the snow, plowing in literally, I managed to watch it, and it really moved me. I am a scientific mind. I am a teacher, a professor, but I loved it because this gives us a female perspective, and more than that, it gives us the perspective of a student, which obviously is always a novelty for me. And also, it is the perspective of a European woman, and you'll see how she talks about her take on the situation of culture, and rather more than culture, education in Africa in particular, and more specifically even in Mozambique. And you will be able to see the diachrony, in a sense, the first minutes in this documentary show a European woman contemplating this faraway reality, stopping at what's really eye-catching from a European perspective. And yet, as we move on in documentary, diachronically, the discourse in this documentary stops looking at what's really eye-catching and starts going deeper into how may Africans see their own teaching system. It is a beautiful documentary, a brave documentary, and for a teacher, for a professor such as myself, it provides extraordinary learnings. We see what students face, and it gives us a unique perspective. So without further ado, I want to show you a trailer of this afternoon's documentary.
One of the mistakes I think we see often is a belief that somehow children are like wild horses waiting to be trained to be tame horses.
La escuela no puede ser un techo donde memorizar conceptos a base de repetir las cosas a gritos 100 veces.
Tanto mulher como homem devem se instruir, e não só para o seu sustento em casa, na família, mas sim para todo o país.
Se está confundiendo educación con capacitación. Es muy distinto.
The President of the General Assembly has kindly relinquished his seat to Ms. Martha Borrell.
Africa has been improving the number of children that go to school, but no progress has been made in what they are learning.
Spending money on education is not charity.
Si solo fuese dinero, el problema lo podríamos solucionar, pero exige coordinación, exige formar profesores y pagarles bien.
I don't remember much of the content I was taught at school. I remember my teachers.
Mas os nossos professores fala o que você não passa da disciplina minha. Sem dormir conmigo.
Cualquier persona no puede hacer, obviamente no puede hacer eso, pero además un maestro que debe ser, digamos, la guía, quien le da esperanza para el futuro, no puede hacer una cosa así.
¿En qué pilares basan la educación algunos de estos países, donde puedes estar expuesta a abusos dependiendo del viento que sople?
Si no existe educación, no existe nada.
La filosofía que tiene que meterse dentro de toda la ayuda es incentivar para que la gente, y además es que es la única manera de... La autoestima es un motor fundamental para ello.
I didn't understand the huge school dropout figures in these countries. So I wanted to go and sit in their desks and talk to the boys and girls my age who went to those schools, and above all, understand the reasons that led them to drop out of school. So we have an obligation not to fade away from this initial illusion.
Okay, so thank you. So those were the rules. As you can see, there's always a glitch somewhere. The thrilling of broadcasting live. Okay, so we have an hour, and I will give the floor to the participants for a maximum of 15 minutes. And something that I find really good fun when I teach is to be particularly stern. I'll show them 5 minutes left sign, and then I'll very apocalyptically let them know that their time is up, which is something people understand very well, so that we can stick to those 15 minutes for each. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. When we give the opportunity to the audience to ask a question, everybody starts staring at the tip of their shoes, which become fascinating all of a sudden. And so because of that, we've established a chat. We are streaming the event. And so as we move on, we can send the questions via that chat, and we will then convey them to the colleagues who will now start speaking. With that, we would close the event after that Q&A. So now let us be very attentive to what they have to share with us. Those are basically the rules for the session. And if that's okay, let us start hearing from the participants, starting from my right, moving to the left. So we would start with Mr. Alberto Guerrero from FECU, the Federation of Association Centers and Clubs for UNESCO. Well, I think the associations, clubs and centers for UNESCO's vision's very clear already. Perhaps it is worth nuancing that this is a grassroots movement supported by UNESCO. The first club founded came into existence in 1947 in Sendai, Japan, before Japan was a member state of UNESCO. And there are roughly 5,000 associations, clubs, and centers scattered through all the member states. And all these centers and clubs and associations work for the UNESCO values. There is more than 100 associations since 1949, and the reason for their being comes from the preamble of the Constitution of UNESCO, as I said before. So that's very clear already. Perhaps my most significant call, the one I bring, is related to a report I read a few days ago from UNESCO that talks about sustainable development goals in particular. You see, the other day I was thinking that the pandemic we're all suffering had covered everybody's lips with a mask in the literal and figurative sense. There is antidotes, vaccinations underway, and we are very quickly getting all our vaccine. And yet there's more pandemics to set our eyes on: the hunger chronic pandemic, the poverty pandemic, the water scarcity pandemic, the climate crisis pandemic. And what kind of vaccination do we have, or are we using for those? These are pandemics that, if we think about the SDGs back in the day, before 2015, from 2010 to 2015, there were 8 Millennium Goals, if you remember. They were achieved to a certain extent, and now we are dealing with the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. 6 years have gone by, we still have 9 to go, and as we've heard before, what are we leaving? What are we bequeathing our descendants, the future generations? What will they see? Will we be to blame for what they see? What kind of life will they be able to lead? And so this report, it'll come out in February, but when there's a consensus on it, but it talked about how there is scientific evidence from various sources, various members of the United Nations service, that illustrate that climate adjustments are going to accelerate and become very tangible before 2050. And the consequences will be water scarcity and others. And this will lead to destruction and exodus, and life on Earth will undergo modifications never seen before, with terrible consequences for human beings. Those devastating effects due to climate change will take place no matter what greenhouse gases reduction we achieve, and even if we limit to 2 degrees the increase of global temperatures. More than 80 million people will go hungry from now till 2050. 130 million may fall into extreme poverty by then. I dare say these are very significant numbers, so we must take action. This is why we launch this urgent call to the peoples of the earth. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero. You've had ample time, and you've really stuck to time, so thank you for that too. And now Ms. Isabel Fuentes, who is welcoming us in her home today. You have the floor. Well, thank you. I'm going to speak on behalf of the foundation for which I have the honor of working, Fundación La Caixa. And I don't want to talk about a number of actions or list a number of commitments aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Further to that, from the Fundación La Caixa, since 2004, we've shared the values and the goals with the United Nations values and goals. And with the current 17 SDGs, of course, we are fully aligned with those. And this call to the peoples of the earth, something that Professor Mayor Zaragoza has been talking about for years. And he's been for years saying, we're running out of time, we need to launch this urgent call. And so what I want to do is basically share a bit about how we work. Rather than listing out what we do, I want to explain how we can contribute as a foundation aligned for many years now with those values. A foundation with ample experience, and of course with a significant budget. But if you have a significant budget, you need to be a bit organized. You need to bring order to that. And so you develop a methodology, which is where we can contribute and support civil society. This is what we will be talking about on the 21st of September, how to get organized. On the trailer of the documentary we'll watch this afternoon, we've seen it's not about money, it's about coordination oftentimes. And President Faine tends to talk a lot about that. Good management is what raises people out of crisis, and I've heard this many times from him. So let me give you some examples and then zoom out into general notions or concepts. I am Kasia Foran's director, but the foundation is much bigger. And of course, there's a lot more that takes place in my colleagues doing the different areas and different programs. So I'm just a spokesperson, not as an expert, but as merely a spokesperson. I want to share about the 17 SDGs and truly and really, what are we working on? On the first one, eradicate poverty in all its forms around the world. We can talk about the pro-infant program, Pro-Infancia, which is a program. Third, good health and well-being for all ages is something that we work on, particularly with regards to research, particularly biomedical research. On the fourth one, quality education, inclusive and equitable education, promoting opportunities for all. It's an SDG we contribute to with Educasia, with the program we share with Telefonica, and also at the Cosmo Kasia and Kasia Forum centers. 8, decent work and economic growth, inclusive, once again, full productive employment and decent work for all. Of course, this is related to the Incorpora program. Goal number 9, with Kasia Impulse, we contribute to the promotion of innovation. Let me just open a parenthesis here concerning innovation. We understand innovation immediately if we think about the biotechnological applications, but innovation can be social too. And perhaps this is what has led us to enter into a very stable cooperation with the Demos Path Institute, because we pursue the same goals, right, Professor? Cultura de Paz Foundation and the Autonomous University of Madrid, academia and the social agents are all pursuing the same objectives in this context. And of course we say, let us put that thread into the eye of the needle and start sewing. And it's a very good metaphor, because at the end of the day, education is at the heart of most consolidated programs. Incorpora, Kasia Pro Infancia. These are all programs that can be replicated, can be copied, they are validated, they are efficient and fully tested. And of course, brilliant, crazy ideas are also very good. But it is true also that when there's a big project with a significant budget, with a clear goal, with clear parameters of efficiency, we need to create a methodology with all agents involved. And I insist, academia and social organizations who know the people who have the needs are key in this sense. Kasia's Foundation's goals are all targeting this notion of improving people's lives. So with the administrations and with these organizations, coordinating all these actors, all these agents, coordinating all this, we can take that step towards innovation with humanities, with social sciences. That's a kind of innovation we often forget about, which is very important. I wanted to mention this. I'm also talking about or thinking about the intercultural program that the director of the Demos Path Institute has also alluded to. So we work in close cooperation also with the United Nations in artificial intelligence projects for developing countries, for refugees, and so on. But this step towards innovation in order to create social change is very important. That's why I wanted to talk about it. Reducing inequalities between countries is also very important, and between people. This is why we have Pro Futuro and international programs. And then if we talk about goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions and societies, that's a goal we all share. Why am I mentioning all this? I started by saying, I need to really talk about how we work rather than what we do. Why do we do these things, and why do we do them this way? Well, as I said, we have a significant budget, 60% of which goes to social programs, 20% roughly goes to promoting research, particularly biomedic research, and another 20% goes to the promotion of culture, including humanities, sciences, and the arts. It would be perhaps dissemination of culture, cultural projects, and education projects. But at the end of the day, we are a Caixa Forum. And regardless of all these programs that are implemented hand in hand with civil society, as we'll talk on the 21st of September, with private and public agents cooperating, with the knowledge that we get from universities also in order to create a methodology so that these programs can be implemented elsewhere. Beyond all that, today we are celebrating this kind of session. And I've been around for many years, and when I hear talking about civil society, I think about the many acts and conferences I've presided or attended. And what I think to myself is, what's happening here? Here we coordinate and we are even influence on the decisions that are being made at political level. So a place such as Caixa Forum, which is just a little grain of sand in this huge mountain, that's the world, is a catalyst. And I think the chemistry metaphor is good here. It's a catalyst to bring all these agents together, to get them talking. I've seen here in this place, I've seen social organizations entering into a dialogue, those who really know firsthand the problems and the needs of society, talking to other institutions, talking to the experts who study this from their labs, from their libraries, on the basis of their analytical and empirical studies and on the basis of their readings. And also, they've engaged in a dialogue with the administration institutions. And there is a willingness to listen. There's always been a willingness to listen from public entities. And if we talk about, in any country really, about legislative lobbies, I think, and I'm increasingly convinced, this fabric of civil society, properly articulated, which is what we all want, is and must be the biggest legislative lobby of all. The individuals who make up society, a society properly organized to identify needs and seek out and even anticipate as much as possible solutions for those needs, that's of the essence. So why not start talking about how civil society ought to be, and this is perhaps an idea, a crazy notion, ought to be the biggest lobby in all countries for all the peoples. So the call I would launch, I dare, calling the peoples, myself, to coordinate and manage in a concerted manner legislation. And I'll leave it at that because, you know, I've gone on for a little while, so I'll leave it there.
No, we're delighted. We're delighted. We're delighted to hear all your comments. Thank you very much, Isabel, for your words and for welcoming us here. I'll pass the floor now to Leticia de Pico, Coaña, so that she tells us about things from her perspective. You have the floor. Thank you very much. I had a plan here, a script, but as you hear things, sometimes new ideas pop into your head. Our dear President, Mr. Federico, probably heard me say often that this call to the peoples of the earth and this event show the radical modernity of UNESCO. UNESCO created the national committees for recovery in a world that depended on diplomacy very heavily, and created the national committees in the member states. They're voluntary, so that foreign affairs were not the only ones to deal with all this. And I've got the list here of what they said, but basically to let in the ministries that are not for foreign affairs and associate the organization to the main national bodies that work on education, science and culture. And this, which we all take for granted today in the UN system, wasn't normal, and in fact, Mr. Federico, correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't so normal until quite recently. We're talking about 76 years ago. The world was international relations. It was the foreign affairs ministries that dealt with external and foreign policy and international affairs. So it's a source of pride to see that I represent the UNESCO and also the state, and it is a source of pride to me to see how this novelty continues to bear fruit. And as you were saying, the National Committee, the UNESCO, has become a catalyst and has done very original work in that respect. So, as our president said, it's a very strong civil network, been going for a long time. The FECU is 35 years old, and there are previous clubs. UNESCO is the first body of the UN system that Spain entered. Culture, science, and education set up bridges between states and society, and that is why our civil movement is so strong with the schools, the universities. We have the Creative City project and everything that is local. The UNESCO has dynamized things very significantly. In fact, and this my dear friends at the Federation know, and they're well aware of it. I hope that we're successful, although we're overloaded with work, but we're preparing another royal decree where we want to include this civil movement in a stronger way. So this call to the peoples of the earth is a very good proposal that has to do with UNESCO as the moral depository of the UN. In these times of hyper-specialization, UNESCO has to lead, and without civil society and its civil networks, it would not be able to feed in, to contribute to that international agenda. And now I must criticize the 2030 agenda very slightly. We've got 8.5 years only before 2030, and I think the pandemic has put things into context. The ODS, the goals, the development goals, we got the education number 4, we got water and water treatment facilities, and then we got submarine life, the oceans, but of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and science should perhaps be highlighted more, because without science we are not going to be able to achieve any of the SDGs, and culture is not included either. So I think that in a context of hyper-specialization, that is, culture is in the preamble, science has to do with a lot of the objectives, but let's make use of this call to the peoples of the earth, and this And remember science, we have to go back to that idea of a moral depository and a wider look at things. But there is one SDG that is really relevant in this context, and that is, it almost seems not so important, but it's number 17, Alliances for Sustainable Development, and especially 1717, which is public and private alliances. In a case like the Acacia Foundation, it's very obvious because we sometimes think about only about big companies, but private means a civil society in the most noble sense of the word, independent from what is public. And today we have with us three protagonists of that alliance. Associations and clubs, the Acacia Foundation and Culture for Peace Foundation, organized and coordinated, and that have to promote and drive UNESCO and the system of the UN, and remind us that we only have 8.5 years left. With the Acacia Foundation, we're working also on other issues with UNESCO in Barcelona. In Spain, we also have a center, Category 2 center, the Abertis Foundation. We hope to have another one with the Acacia Foundation soon. And the truth is that I'll go back to where I started. It's a source of pride to see how the UNESCO's role as a catalyst brings together civil society and makes us all aware. And those of us who defend the public interest can better absorb the social demands and interpret what we have to do. And that is all from me. Thank you. Thank you. Leticia. We've got 5 minutes and we should be finished. But people are sticking to their time very, very strictly. I'll pass the floor to Federico Mayor, who is for him to give us his perspective. He's a very authorized voice. Let's hear him, Mr. Federico. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the previous speakers, including the presentation, the introduction, because I think that they've given us the different dimensions of this call to the peoples of the earth. It's an urgent call. I have to be very clear about this because there are times in life when we cannot look the other way and say, well, we'll see. No. At this time, the world is under is dominated by the different powers that we have in the world that are based on a huge military infrastructure, $4 billion a day. And this also has a financial aspect, an energy or power aspect, which is now giving way to other areas, like, for instance, the cultivation of soy, lithium, and these very much needed resources for world development. And then we have the media power of the media. We are in the hands of huge media, and these media also make huge amounts of money, and they have a greater and greater weight in this plutocratic system. It is plutocratic because it was an invention of Reagan in 1988. They began when there was some hope because with Nelson Mandela and what have you, we began to see that racism was on the wane and that forgiveness could be the road ahead with Nelson Mandela and then with Mikhail Gorbachev, when Reagan predicted that, or told him that he cannot reduce any further the number of nuclear, or the nuclear power, because you have to be prepared to face up to the Soviet Union. And Gorbachev replied, it was October '86, he replied, no, as from now, President Reagan spoke about the Star Wars program, but Gorbachev said, no, what we've got to do is we've got to fight starvation, and people have to have enough to eat. And we now have a pandemic, by the way, a coronavirus, which with older people is having a very heavy impact. But what is important is that people that are younger than 60, it's not a very serious virus, and it allows people to continue with their life. But what I wanted to say is that we have to realize that at this time we are living, for the first time in history, we have the possibility, people can finally express and to break down differences based on sex or ideology or religion, and we are at a magnificent time, and we're not making the most of it, and this is what concerns me. Only a few years ago, when the Spanish transition took place, I remember very well, first of all, there were no women, or very few women, exceptionally, but there was a feeling that problems had to be solved, that we had to converse, that dialogue was needed, that there were problems that were more important than personal opinions. And what was clear was that at that time, very few people had a voice. And I've calculated that from 1976, in 1976, 90% of Spaniards were born, lived and died within 40 square kilometers, and they didn't know anything more, they didn't know anything about anything, because we had no information, and especially, and this is true, not just in Spain, in the world, we were afraid of everything, we were obedient, we were silenced, we couldn't act. But now we can act. Now, for some years, thanks in part to digital technologies, we have a voice. We can use WhatsApp to communicate. Let's use it to participate. Let's use it to contribute. We cannot just remain as mere spectators, and we cannot continue to commit this crime of silence. We now have a voice. We can now really do what was premature in 1945, when Roosevelt, in the Charter of the UN, said, we, the people. He doesn't say the states, we the governments, he says, we the peoples have decided to avoid the horror of war for future generations. But of course, it wasn't a question finally of peoples, but of states that had a very great power, and the strongest imposed their vetoes, and the arms race began with the Soviet Union, and they began to forget about the peoples, and they didn't exist because, as I say, it was hard enough to survive in everyday world and life. But there were institutions that began to say, we've got to be careful, because if we continue with governments that turn their back on the UN and set aside the UN and reject the UN to have world hegemony. We will spend more and more on weapons and arms and military expenses, and we will be a group of, it will be a smaller and smaller group of countries that will rule the world. At this time, it's 196 countries in the UN, and they want G6, G7, G8, G20 want to tell us what to do. What is going on? Why are 7 countries going to tell the others what to do? We have the UN to avoid and prevent that kind of thing. And of course, with every legal and requirement and limitation, but and now we have in the US a president who's a Democrat, and we've, for 6 years, from 2015, when thanks to President Obama, what the UNESCO and Club of Rome and the Academy of Sciences of the US had been defending for so long, had tried to achieve. And in 1947, the UNESCO created the International Union for the Foundation for the Conservation of Nature. Then it created the hydrological, geological program, the oceanographic program. The oceanographic program is absolutely key, and the oceans take up 2/3 of the surface of the Earth. So they're very important, oceans, obviously. And UNESCO created the oceanographic program and the Man and the Biosphere program. And in 1972, the Club of Rome came along, and Aurelio Peccei, a visionary, said, the limits of growth. We cannot continue to grow in this way because we can't stop replacing what we consume, because what about the future generations? That was rejected. The Academy of Sciences of the US in 1979 made one of the most important decisions from a point of view of alerting world society. They said it's not just emissions that are important, but the ability to recapture phytoplankton in the oceans, their capacity to recapture CO3 and what have you. We're always thinking about the forests, but 82% of the recapture is by the sea, and it's 2/3 of the planet. And they say, yes, the recapture is being affected because tankers wash out their deposits and their tanks in the middle of the sea, and that creates a film that asphyxiates the phytoplankton, etc. And nobody took any notice. And we said, well, something has to be done, and that is when, and there's an extraordinary figure here, Maurice Strong, who under the influence of Aurelio Peccei, the Club of Rome, said, we have to have a world summit. And we started with world summits. And there was a world summit in Rio in 1992, and it said, we've got to continue this agenda called the 2021 agenda, because if we don't, our descendants will have a very bad time. And with that agenda, well, we were satisfied, and we said, yes, finally, but not a single penny was given to the 2021 agenda, and for the 21st century. And now then we had the summit of 2002 in Johannesburg, Kofi Annan, and we said, yes, now we have really truly realized, and not a cent, not a penny was given. On the contrary, more was done to look for fossil reserves for the big business, for the famous GDP of the world, and nothing was done, nothing. And I want to remind you there was something very, very important that cannot be set aside. Based on lies, Iraq was invaded. And it cost thousands of people. Why? Because what people were interested was not Baghdad, it was Mosul. And let's remember Libya, it wasn't a question of Tripoli, it was a question Benghazi, where the oil and natural gas is. So we've got to be very clear. We've arrived at a point where if we want to look at a young person in the eye and not be ashamed of forgetting to serve society, well, now we have to really face up to that, because we cannot continue to forget, to be left behind by a system, which I repeat, a system that is based on the peoples. But then the peoples have been abandoned, and it's always been the same peoples. The Society of Nations was abandoned too, and this should be studied and known so that people are aware. In 1919, the Democrat President of the US, Wilson, proposed the creation of the Society of Nations. And they said, now we will have permanent peace. There will be, Germany can't rearm. There has to be an international court of justice for permanent peace. And it was all solved, apparently. But then the US came along, and the US, the Republican Party, introduced an incredible measure. The US never belonged to the Society of Nations that the US created. What was the consequence of that? Well, Second World War. And Second World War because they allowed Germany to rearm, they allowed the supremacists to come along. And supremacists, we've got to be careful with them, by the way. Isabel mentioned everything that has to do with the social structure. You've got to be careful with those who are supremacists, fanatics, dogmatic. Let's not forget that that allowed, in 1933, I repeat it time and time again, Adolf Hitler, who wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, and he said the Aryan race is incompatible with the state of affairs in the world. So Mussolini said no, not the Aryans, the Romans, the Roman race are more important. And in Japan, there was another gentleman, Hirohito, who said no, it's the Japanese. And you know how that ended. Immense number of victims as a result of that terrible situation. Because the Society of Nations didn't work. And then the UN were created, and for the first time we have a great woman, Eleanor Roosevelt, who organized the International Declaration of Human Rights. And it looked like things were on the right road again, but the arms race started, and we moved back again. And now we're at a time where, once again, and I have lived this myself, the Republican Party does not accept the proposal for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. This is a disgrace. Why must we think today that our children, our grandchildren, some of us won't be here for very long, but what about our children and grandchildren might have to suffer a nuclear war in the future? In 1986, we reduced by 70%, but we got 30%. And as Gorbachev said to Reagan, now we can destroy humanity only 300 times instead of 1,000 times. And it's a disgrace that these weapons still exist. But as I say, we've been ignoring this. The G7 has got together again. the first thing they've done is that they've got to increase weapons, that China this and that. So I think we have to be very clear and say now is the time to get involved. It's time to become players, not spectators. The time has come to tell people that planet Earth is in danger, and I'm talking as a scientist. The challenges, irreversible challenges, should not be accepted by the population. We should immediately say, especially what is irreversible, we have to try to stop it, because it's very sad that that situation is irreversible. For many years now, I have been struggling to combat metabolic diseases in the new born babies, because I thought it's terrible. These children could be normal all their life, but once they're damaged neuronally, it is irreversible. Had we invested more in this, perhaps we could have avoided all these irreversible problems. So now, for the first time in history, we know that we are facing irreversible threats. The poles are melting, the permafrost is melting, and that's terrible. We knew this, but it's been there for hundreds of years. It's liberating methane when it melts, which is 23 times more damaging than anything else, and we're just sitting back and watching it. So Soledad Gallego said something that I like very much. There are times when the means are weapons of distraction, not destruction, and we are distracted, and this cannot be the case.
I love football, but of course, you know, that passion for a team, that's a bit over the top. You know, we're taking steps for it to be possible to do something for future generations. You know, in Antarctica, by now, already there's an iceberg with the size of Mallorca's island that's melted. So this cannot be. It is our obligation, the obligation of the people who have been for a few years now trying to turn into actors rather than spectators. We need to take action. 25 years ago, it wasn't so easy to speak up, but now we can take part. We can be actors ourselves. And as I mentioned on the video you saw, there is a mistake, a common mistake, which is thinking we just inspire ourselves in what economic institutions say about education. Please, let us not do that. Educators need to speak about education. We have wonderful teachers all around. They are the ones who are to talk about education. And no teacher is going to say that learning English is part of an education. Maths and English and chemistry, all those subjects are just skills that one can have by learning those subjects. Education is knowing about the first article of UNESCO's constitution, be free and responsible. Let's see if we can be free and responsible. Let's see if we are able to, now when we celebrate the 75th, now 6th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations and UNESCO, let's see if we can manage to be free and responsible. And we wouldn't be free and responsible if we wouldn't take in our own hands democratic multilateralism and stop plutocracies, stop seeing how some countries teach us all and give us all lessons about what we are to do, particularly when what they say is delocalization in terms of the production means is what we need to do. Each country needs to specialize in one thing. Spain is for tourism, so-and-so is for something else. What's that? What is all that about? The economists in the countries need to inspire freely and responsibly with regards to what is to be done, but we also need the education, which is why I think it is good that from now until September, we must try to get as many people as possible to start thinking about how from now on they are going to take part. There can be a popular movement that calls for things to be different. With the 15th of March, José Luis San Pedro, the professor San Pedro, and Stefan Hessel took part. He is the one who said, become indignant, remember that? But it's not anyway, it is about becoming indignant and becoming involved. We can all get involved now, so let's do it. Let's do it so that multilateralism is what rules in the world and tells us what to do. Multilateralism has spoken already. There was a president in the States, like Biden now, Obama, who signed the Paris Accords of 2015. It was signed already, this idea, this notion of multilateralism, this SDGs, all these resolutions by United Nations are a call to transforming the world. But then, of course, back in the day, it was the autumn of bright horizons. And yet, Trump comes along and he doesn't want to sign anything. America first is all he cares about. And there was nobody in the world, nobody in Europe, who faced up to him. 27 countries in the European Union with such a staunch tradition for the defense of human rights, and we've all been quiet. For 6 years, we've been wasting time. 6 years of the implementation of the 2030 agenda that we've almost wasted. Let's be careful, because the future of our descendants is at stake. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor Zaragoza. So we've now finished the round of first interventions by our 4 speakers. All of them have brought to the table very interesting perspectives and very interesting matters. When I started in the Autonomous University of Madrid as a student, we talked about how, depending on the situation we were in, we could study, for instance, Germany and what Germany had done. This is back in the day when we had a dictatorship. This is talking about our origin, right? So then when that went over, and then we came from Africa, then we don't know, and then there was this theory that we came from the very Iberian Peninsula. So that perception of ethnicity is, to say the least, interesting. And Federico has also talked about something that is extremely interesting for September, which is this controversy that exists right now, because a lot is at stake for our societies, particularly in Europe and the States, which is this whole notion and this whole idea of how to define multiculturality or intercultural as an adjective and its projection, because that leads to different models, or potentially to different models. So I was listening to you all, and of course I was taking notes at the same time. And this is something that I've learned to do with the pandemic. As professors had to teach speaking to the wall, to the screen, and at the same time we had to respond to students on the chat. It's been very sad, let me tell you. Teaching, looking at a screen, looking at a wall really is somewhat sinister. The only way I could know I was not on my own was the chat. And through that chat, here today, the attendants who are following us remotely have sent in their comments and questions. They were also sending their greetings, very warm greetings from Malaga. Elena, you can take pride. They are participating like crazy over there. There were also greetings from Igualada. They are also following us from Radio Marca for the program on tourism and travel. Paralelo 20 is the name of the program. So we're not on our own. And there's questions coming in through that chat. Some of them are addressed to the whole panel. They are general questions, and anybody who wants to can respond to those. I'll ask that question first, if that's okay, and then I'll open the floor for questions here at Kasha Forum, and then we'll continue with more questions from the chat. There's a specific, very specific first question from Luisa Marquez, National Coordinator of PA. She says the pandemic has shown the vulnerabilities of the system, increasing inequalities. So my question is, how can we from civil society promote worldwide solidarity and face up to the risk of wasting the efforts already made towards the accomplishment of all the goals of the 2030 agenda? Okay, this is a question for civil society's representatives, I dare say. Okay, I congratulate Luisa Marquez, National Coordinator of Schools Associated to UNESCO. For quite some time, I've been thinking also that, of course, we have the SDGs, we are implementing those, and yet, if we want future generations, the ones who are right now studying in schools, if we want them to really take on this task, we need to raise awareness among them. Because today, no matter how old we are, us grown-ups, as Federico Mayor was saying, we don't have that much time left, in a sense. But a child, an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, needs to start becoming very sensitive to all matters concerning SDGs, so that when this person is 16, 17, 18 and starts working, knows about all this. And it's not completely oblivious to all these notions. So right from the start, from the very beginning of education, we need to raise awareness so that we can transform the world, indeed. We've heard that these 17 SDGs, all of them at the very center, ought to have education. Education is of the essence for everything in life, and we need great quantities of education. Learning, training is not the same as educating. Please let us not mistaken all those terms. So we need to educate for the future, educate for the life ahead. That's what future generations need, so that we can prevent the disasters we are witnessing. We've heard about the contamination in our planet, but apparently the universe is also full of waste, full of garbage. What are we doing? Where are we heading with all this? What can we do? This is what future generations need to deal with, and so we need to start educating them right from the start. I don't know whether anybody wants to add anything to what I said. I can perhaps give the floor to the people in attendance here in person. Are there any questions in the room? We have a roving mic. Should any of you want to ask a question here live? Thank you, Leticia. Leticia's got a question herself. Responding to what the president of FECU just said, and building on what's been asked and said, and as Federico also alluded to, we need, and also what Isabel said, we need to become a great lobby, civil society. And I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who wants to work on the implementation of public policy. But of course, I am also civil society. I'm also a member of civil society. When I stopped being a civil servant, I'm also a person, I'm also part of civil society. And we have a very rich society indeed, with many movements in its midst. I'm thinking about the 15th of March, and Federico mentioned that movement in particular. And we need to continue working along those lines and try to become organized. The civil society needs to be organized, needs to continue trying to get into the state, national agenda, those issues that society really cares about. Building on the responses I'm hearing, I'm thinking about, for instance, Pro Infancia, Caixa program. There's been times when we accelerated in the face of different types of crises that have heightened those inequalities. And of course, all evidence available, all scientific empirical evidence shows us that what we need to do is first take evidence as the basis for action, and secondly, cut out vicious circles with programs that might be more aid type of programs, temporarily, very specifically for a short term, but should be transforming programs, all in all, long term. Programs need to be transforming, need to be transformative in order to break away and solve the problems indeed. Because if we just provide aid, then there is a relapse. We go back to where we were. And so the key for Pro Infancia, for instance, to break this inherited poverty vicious circle, education. Education is the key. The magic wand is education. In the end, educating individuals, but not individualistic people, so that they can fully develop as persons and as members of society. As Professor Mayor Zaragoza very wisely pointed out, and I think we all share that idea, it's not about an ad hoc training according to the needs of some entity or some people, but rather education for full development of those individuals that make up society. And along the lines of that full education, all the solutions will spring up. Mr. Mayor Zaragoza, go ahead. I wanted to say education indeed is very important, but UNESCO years ago already established that it had to be education for all throughout life. Because we always think about children when we talk about education, but let us be honest. First, we need to talk about the education of those who should be more educated because we're older and have greater responsibilities. So it is lifelong education. In that respect, it is not only an educational plan or a significant and sound education law, but rather it is about information, what we do with information, how we share it. It is about the tremendous power of the media right now, which is something to be reckoned with also. When we talk about education, we need to be mindful of how the media need to verify and what they publish or say. And at institutional level, at international level, we need to be very clear about this. Most information provided by the newscasts. And news and information are not the same thing. Again, here we need to differentiate news, which are some extraordinary event, from information. And so they keep talking about, events, very flamboyant events, people killing each other and whatever. They're very fanciful news, but they don't really tell us about what's happening, really. They don't really give us the information. And again, we need to reflect on that very seriously and very carefully. If we think about the media in the States, for instance, in the United States of America, if we think about the media in Latin America, if we think about the media and how they serve the powers that be also in Spain, well, we need to take that into consideration when we talk about education, particularly because most people's formal education in school is over, and yet we should be far more educated than we are. But we are used to having very deficient information. Sometimes it even reaches provocative limits. It gets to a point that should not even be allowed in democratic system. So one of the proposals we put forward to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the UN and UNESCO is this. We need to constantly support multilateralism, and for that, at world scale, we need to reach an agreement with regards to what democracy means. For instance, there's a number of declarations on human rights. The 1948 one, of course, and then there's been others. There's been a very specific declaration for the children's rights. The Convention on the Rights of Children by UNICEF. And UNICEF is worthy of our utmost respect, of course. In 1989, there was a big call, international call, to focus on the rights of children specifically, because they are sacred. And it was wonderful in New York, in the United Nations, the top representatives of all countries gathered, and it was wonderful. Back then, the United States was ruled by Bush, the father. It was a Republican government. And he said he wasn't going to sign. And everybody was already there. Von Feisinger from Germany said, but what's he saying now? He's made us all come all the way here. Now he's not signing. Anyhow, we requested that at least he didn't say he wasn't going to sign until the end. In the end, when he was about to say he wasn't going to sign, we all started singing, "We are the world, we are the children," to keep him from actually being heard. Next day, people knew that he hadn't signed, nevertheless. And it is still not signed by the United States. And these things are not known, and we should know. The United States, the Republican Party in the United States, being in power, are the only people who have not signed the Universal Declaration of Children's Rights. These are things that need to be known. And the media ought to, at all ages, at all levels, provide information that helps people face responsibly and intelligently the current challenges in the world. So yes, let's talk about education, but lifelong education, including the media, and telling the media very clearly they need to start trying to be neutral. They ought to try and be neutral, objective, and provide genuine, truthful information rather than biased information. Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next question, unless there's a question from the audience. Oh, there's a question here at the front. So, if you can wait a little bit, I could say, as a professor, speaking as a professor, I could say that indeed, when the Bologna Plan was established, one of the indications was that universities ought to provide lifelong learning and education in competencies for all matters. We had to educate or teach competencies. So the big question would be, what are competencies? It's related to attitudes and behaviors, mainly. This is where we dismantle the side of education that's only teaching some content, some knowledge, and we move towards that other side that makes for education, which is the way we perceive things, the way we process things. This is one of the big mandates, and technology is really putting us on the spot, concerning all this, which is why digital continuity projects, as Isabel mentioned, are very important. Digital humanities are very important. So now we have a question here at the front. If you could get the mic to the gentleman, thank you. Good day. Thank you very much for all the interventions. I want to congratulate all the speakers for their very interesting words. My name is Martín Sánchez González. I'm honorary president of the UNESCO Center of Getafe, a chronicle for Getafe also. And I wanted to just make a comment on an issue that Mr. Mayor Zaragoza has often talked about in many other conferences, and it is social media. UNESCO and the centers and associations of UNESCO are not using social media adequately, I don't think. This is a contribution, this is a task we can really get down to and start developing social media, because social media are so powerful. But because they are so powerful, we must use them in favor of the principles we defend. Thank you very much. I just wanted to know what your opinion is along this comment, along these lines. Since you have mentioned me, let me just comment on what you just said. I love the question. It is very relevant. Today, most of the information we receive through social media. And you're right, this is something we haven't talked about specifically, and it's worth mentioning very specifically this topic. I realize even people at the university now sometimes say, I know already. And you need to clarify that they have some information about something, but they don't know. They need to verify that information they just got. That's something else we need to do. One thing is information, the other thing is knowledge. These are different concepts. And when Jacques Delors gave that wonderful talk in 1992 about the 21st century education, what he said was, first you need to learn how to be, then how to know. And so he was establishing already the difference between knowledge and information. Because what we are interested in is learning how to gain knowledge. If we have deep knowledge about reality, then we can transform reality deeply. If we have deep knowledge, or rather we do not have deep knowledge, or we only have very superficial knowledge or only partial knowledge of reality, then we can only do some surface transformation. And so when we talk now about the educational process and lifelong education, of course, one of the key elements is social media. Thank you very much. Before asking the next question, I wanted to mention a couple of things, or rather make a couple of comments. There's a comment that comes from Luis Macua. Greetings from the International Center for Civil Servants Training in Malaga, CIFAO. And building on what we're talking about, Luis makes a comment on how important training and education is to learn how to identify fake news and false knowledge. And then there's a question by Miquel Segura, unless there's another question. There's a couple more questions here. Okay, so after Miguel's question, we'll have a couple more questions here. Miguel was saying, don't you think we need to strengthen the civil network role, the UNESCO civil network role? It is the best guarantor and steward of the values defended by the organization. I am fully aligned with what Miguel is saying. He joined the Federation recently, but indeed, as he points out, that's what's really important. We need to stress and Isabel mentioned this before, and here's a proposal. Yes, of course, that network of associations, clubs, and centers is always welcome here at CaixaForum, and it's wonderful because we need to continue cooperating for all the things we need to do. At the centers, in acts such as these, events such as this, what we do is give visibility to civil society. Indeed, that's what we do, and that civil society is represented by the organizations we bring together. Of course, back in the day, perhaps we were just limited to some activities in our own territories, but right now we can really jointly, at the level of the whole of Spain, undertake actions. We're even in conversations with the Portuguese Federation to reach an agreement to do activities across the border. We need to expand the network, and because we are, advanced in years, without mentioning our age, of course, those that come behind and are those we're passing the baton to need to continue working along those lines. So I would encourage all the clubs, associations, and centers and federations to join forces to work together for all the values that we share and we want to defend, which are UNESCO's values. There's nothing more important than that for us. Thank you.
The question about the social media, I understand that we are, and you are, Mikhail's here, we are all facing a great challenge in this context where social media dominate. Everything is speed. And even this has to do with what Mr. Mayor Zaragoza said. Networks, everybody can manage these media, but I don't know whether people are properly educated to deal with these media, including myself. It's not a generational question. I think it's a big challenge for all institutions and for civil movements because this continuous bombardment of immediacy. This is, how do we reach young people? How do we restore those values of the UNESCO, and how do we get them involved again? That is a challenge that is very significant. And I think that with the support of the foundation La Caixa, that is much more experienced in this field, and that would be another private alliance. Let's hope that we can continue to make movement, to make progress, because this bombardment, I, as a user of social media, am aware, and it's a deluge of things every day, and we've got to be able to do more about this. I would like, since we're at the Caixa, I would like to say that, and this is very good for you to mention this and underline this, there are big, important programs that are digital programs, that are top quality, and at the Palau Macaya in Barcelona, practically every day, and they deal with issues that are sometimes very daring, so to speak, from the point of view of presenting them in terms of ethical quality. For instance, today I think there's an exhibition on euthanasia. So I'm saying this because yes, there is a use, and this has to do with the question about social media. There are a series of agencies and institutions that are contributing very valuably to, on the internet, to public information. And it's very good that this exists and also it's all registered, so if you can't see it right now, because it's not the right time, you can watch it later through YouTube and follow it. So I think that it's very interesting that this has come up, this hot topic of social media at the end of this meeting. Yeah, and the pandemic has obliged us to do this. We tend as humans to say we should do this, we should do that, but we don't do anything about it. But the pandemic has forced our hand. And I'm thinking about many examples. When we reopened on the 1st of June, for instance, there were different things that we had to do to adjust to the situation. We had an exhibition, and we gradually returned to semi-physical activities. The first one was on streaming, La Caixa and Society, and different issues that are not always pleasant, but developed and presented by academics, professionals, and practical views were presented, people that come from the practice, the management, people that are experts, and we started with that. But I'm thinking also that in the field, and if we go back to UNESCO and culture in a general way, Acacia, we are working now on what we will call Acacia Forum Plus, which will be, we want to make it a platform that is a digital platform for culture that includes projects, not just generates projects, but brings together different cultural projects that are interesting, because that also helps with the media, social media, it happens, and the internet in general. There is a lot of it's sometimes difficult to tell what is really worthwhile from what isn't, and we want to contribute to channel all that and to make a platform that is reliable, that allows people to access, and things will be done rigorously. The editorial work that used to be done and continues to be done in written work, but which is fundamental in everything that is offered on the internet, so that those contributions and that easy access and massive access can be guaranteed, because there's a significant level of risk. I just want to say, because I forgot before, the associations of UNESCO are the visible voice, direct voice of society. We interact directly with civil society, and we transmit the values of UNESCO. And we have to be creative. We have to make young people aware of all these issues so that they continue. We at the Getafe Center in Madrid, university and the University Carlos III University have organized Culture of Peace conferences. Federico Mayor Zaragoza has been there, and also the associated schools. Examples of UNESCO, that is a simulacrum of the UN. There was one organized in Madrid at the local council at the town hall in Cibeles to represent and show people how we work at UNESCO. And that meant that way of doing things, that creation of that attitude of and showing people what UNESCO and the UN do is very important to show younger people. Thank you. In this regard, and before we go to the question, I just want to mention what Nicolas Perez Lopez Ibor says. We have information, this deluge of unchecked information is leading to an ignorant society. We have to really make sure that we guarantee the quality of all this information. Luisa Marquez says, and there must be a significant impact locally, regionally, and internationally. Yes, scalable models are very important. Hello. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Thank you to the five panel members. I have tried to look at the contributions of the five people here. We have a problem. We have a pandemic going on and planet Earth is in danger. But where do we go to do something about this? Do we get in touch with governments, with public, with private business? Who is going to put this right? Do we need investments? Where do we need the investments? It's clear they're not in arms and weapons. In education, we have to, grassroots level, make people aware of all this. We've emphasized education. Schools can teach adults, but they're the key for the future generations. We can use education for all these different purposes and solve one of those pandemics, one of those SDGs, hunger in the world. But if we look at things, I might be wrong, but most cutbacks are introduced by governments, public companies, but also private companies in education. Isn't that a bit sad? It's a question that I would like you, Isabel, to answer as a representative of private business, and Leticia, who's a representative of public business. My name is Jose Manuel Castellanos, president of the Getafe Madrid UNESCO Center. That is a very good question. The Caixa Foundation is not a company, it's a foundation. And it is true that we are guaranteed by investments in companies. So companies have to go well in order to have money to continue to invest in our mission. I can only talk on the part of La Caixa, I can't talk in general, but during crises, not the pandemic, but before that, the foundation did not reduce its investments by a single euro. It continued to be 500 million euros a year, which is the budget that had been set in 2005, 2006, and that continued to be the same. When we started to come out slightly out of the financial crisis, we had an increase of 20 million a year, and now I think, I might be wrong, but I think we're at 560 million a year. I believe that we cannot talk about cutbacks in my case, and even the what has been done and the actions that have been, emergency action has been taken. I'm talking about research plans, which are very important. There was an extraordinary competition set up at the end of March to include all the research that could develop regarding vaccines, palliatives with drugs for the virus, etc. And I think that in that respect, I'm spoiled because I work at a place where that is a priority, and there's no problem with that. And increasing our budget is something that doesn't happen, and we can't complain. But I can't talk about anything else. But I do agree that, as we usually say, cutbacks in the long term will really not be any good for anyone. Yes, thank you very much. I wish I had the knowledge and the ability, and I wish I was up to date with every single aspect of this issue. Cutbacks on education are a way of hijacking the future, but I can't really tell you about cutbacks. What the government has to say about this, because it's not my competence, but my personal opinion is I agree with Isabel. Yes, it's hijacking the future if you cut back on education. And I'd never, Alberto, heard you say this, and that should be the focus. Yeah, the core. Not number 4, but it should be at the core of everything. But this is my personal opinion. I can't speak on behalf of the government, obviously. I'm not expert on education, and I don't represent the Ministry for Education. I would like to add to this more general view, because we, for many years, thought, and when multilateralism, democratic multilateralism was set up in 1945, when the UN were created, the first thing we thought was that there had to be social diagnoses had to be rigorous, and there had to be advice for governments when making these decisions. So we thought there has to be a World Health Organization, there has to be a World Trade Organization, labor organization for childhood, etc. And one of the most important organizations that was really very important was, or one of the programs was the program for the UN Program for Development. He said we need a large program to help everybody, and we've got to make sure that development reaches people who have resources in order to teach them how to use them. And that UN program, for some years, it worked quite well. And Europe, there were countries like Norway that were 0.7%, 0.8% of their GDP, and Europe gave everybody a lesson regarding this. Contributions to improving the life of everybody all over the world. But in Spain, in 2007, 2008, we reached almost 0.6% of the GDP that we were contributing with. So there was a national effort, significant national effort to contribute to development in the world. Well, all that, when the financial crisis came along, disappeared. And 3 years ago, we didn't even reach 0.1% of contribution. But this decline is not just a decline in Spain, it's a decline in Europe. And Europe, that was so generous and contributed so much to the development program of the UN, is now becoming a kind of necropolis. And what has happened? Well, what has happened once again is that all that is in very few hands. Intermon, Oxfam are two institutions that give information, very important information about this. And both have said that it's less than 20 big consortiums, less than 20 big consortiums in the world dominate the whole world. So think that only Amazon, the president of Amazon has $140 billion. His personal worth is $140 billion. And then you go to Apple, then you go to Facebook, then you go to Google, and financiers, the financial sector, the power and energy sector, the military sector, and now we've got another big sector, which is everything that has to do with digital information and the media. And you can see what happens. They're trying now to get them to pay taxes, which they weren't even paying. And these are issues that could be resolved when or if we reached the proper scale and did it at world level. If these challenges are global, responses must be global too. and there must be institutional responses by institutions that do everything properly and can act, and everybody can act, and not just those who are in charge, because we know what they're going to tell us, and what they're going to tell us is that they're going to increase those $4 billion a day in arms, but in the face of natural catastrophes, we're not prepared. When there's a flood, a fire, the strongest country in the world, when California fires came along, didn't know what to do. So I'm saying that so that we realize that it is now, it's very urgent to let every nation in the world and the UN tell us what has to be done, and that everybody can express an opinion. And everybody can contribute. That's especially important. It cannot be that the countries at this time, a wealthy country that has a lot of lithium, does not contribute. Well, if you got lithium, well, you know that immediately the big so-called markets will surround you, take your lithium, and you will be left with nothing, which is what is happening with coltan. That coltan is what makes our mobiles possible and everything else. And countries that are around the Great Lakes district and area in Africa are rich in that resource. These countries have the mineral, and it's taken quickly to Rwanda and Uganda, and the World Bank says the GDP of Rwanda has gone up. Yes, it's gone up because that's where, from there, it's exported to the whole of the world, the product that should benefit the Kibu and other tribes and the local populations. And I think that your question is very interesting, and that it's worthwhile looking into it, and looking into this and having this general perspective. In the charter that we presented, the letter that we submitted in September, this call that is aimed at the General Secretary of the UN, who, by the way, has thanked us. We sent it, and he said yes. He's delighted. And at the end of the day, we propose that, in addition, if there are 196 countries, we want everybody in a logical and just and fair way to participate. So that people can participate, everybody can participate, and the citizenry can participate. But at the end, we said something very important: a universal declaration of about all this. Because when you hear Mr. Ortega talking about democracy right now, maybe we haven't been able to define what democracy is. So we propose an universal declaration of democracy. Like in 1948, there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now we propose a Universal Declaration of Democracy. Well, thank you very much for your answers. We have another question, then I want your answers to be very, very short, because at 1:30 we've got to finish the event and we've got 10 minutes.
Quiero recordar, Elena, ¿tenías una pregunta? ¿O no? Ah. Vale, entonces perfectamente. Muchas gracias, Elena.
I wanted to just reflect a little bit based on experience and to put forward a proposal. The reflection is that, well, I'm the director of the documentary that will be shown this afternoon. So on the basis of that, we've had an experience that is very relevant. When this documentary, outside the usual distribution channels, has been projected in schools, when we've shown it in schools with 150 students watching it, no more because of the pandemic, and these were secondary education students, having done this in roughly 6 schools, the day that we spent the least time with questions from these 150 secondary education students, it was 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, 2 hours and 3/4, asking. They kept asking questions. So that very small experience, in a sense, leads me to thinking how I would love it if now in September we open this wonderful space to debate all these concepts you're talking about. So I would love to be able to integrate, to include young people. I would love to see representatives of these students, these children, young adults who are 15, 16. I would love for them to be there, not only us, plus themselves with their ideas, their opinions, their tweets. They engage in really intense debates and get so much content out of it. We think about, the usual media outfits, and yet these guys communicate in such a wonderful way about everything that's being said. In our experience, for instance, with the documentary, and of course it is my daughter who appears in the documentary, and they considered the experience was wonderful, and they opened the doors for her, and Marta was 16 back then, so she could go talk to the experts at United Nations. You see the talk she gave, but this generated a lot of issues in many countries that had a lot to say in the World Day for Education. And she was the only girl, the only leading character in a forum with 150 plus countries. Mr. Gutierrez, the Secretary General of the United Nations, understood that, and with that given 3 minutes, like everybody else gave her 5 minutes, so that at least there would be one representative at what they were talking about, which was education. The only person who was representing the parties concerned was Marta, actually. So I would love for us, when we do this in September, to somehow open the doors for the people we're talking about, the young people, not only the media and ourselves, but also the young people, to be there and be able to take center stage and speak and filter what is being said. Because at the end of the day, they are the future. This is for them. Mr. Mayor Zaragoza says this in the documentary. You can know a lot of maths, you can know a lot of science, and be very poorly educated. Education is at the heart of everything. How it is conveyed to you and your experiences is what makes sense of everything. Thank you very much. Delighted to hear from you. Thanks. Yes, there's a comment. I totally agree with you. I cannot say more or less than that. I fully agree. And I congratulate you for that daughter of yours who is wonderful. And we take note, see how we can include the young people. But indeed, yes, there should be a representation of the young people. Since we're talking about them, we're talking about the future generations. There should be a representation of young people in September, of course. Okay, before we wrap it up, I feel there's been some very interesting contributions on the chat. Luisa Marquez says, associated schools are promoting an integrated education of people for the future, for the planet, focusing on the new generations, working on the implementation of the 2030 agenda, particularly the 4.7 goal, more in particular. And that I thought was very interesting. Also, Luisa says, since 2015, in the face of the Millennium Development Goals, the Incheon Declaration has promoted the achieving of these goals. In Spain, we are at the forefront in terms of commitment and innovation. In a sense, we should really put our efforts forward. Luisa also mentions we have tremendous potential to make a contribution on social transformation. Antonio Damián Requena from Málaga comments on what Luisa, Alberto, Federico have said. We must inspire young people in Malaga who are cutting back in their applied psychology master, practicing at the UNESCO Center in Malaga in collaboration with the university. And we would finish. Thank you, Antonio, by the way, for this contribution. We would then wrap it up by very succinctly saying that Ono Seró, president of the Catalan UNESCO Association, he poses a question for Federico Mayor Zaragoza. The multilateralism culture is not only defined at the international level, but also at grassroots level in each town. How can the UNESCO Association strengthen and promote it? I didn't understand the question. Ono Seró, president of the UNESCO Association in Catalonia, of the Catalan Federation of the UNESCO Associations. Multilateralism, he says, is not only defined at international level, but also at grassroots level. So how can the UNESCO Association strengthen and promote it? Well, when I talk about worldwide scale, I mean with the participation of all levels, of course, all cultures, local culture and even personal culture, which is the one I'm most interested in. Because oftentimes when we talk about the definition of a cultural space, we tend to include people who do not belong or would not want to belong to that space defined in such a way, which is why we need to be very careful. Yes, UNESCO has a very strong track record, has held many meetings throughout the years. But of course, at the end of the day, each person is unique. And in the end, we need to allude to this marvel, which is the uniqueness of each human being. And there's a declaration on diversity, there's a declaration on tolerance. So he can rest assured we will, of course, take all those considerations into account. Honor, you can rest assured. You can because Federico Mayor says so. Okay, so we're going to close this event, and it's been a real treat to moderate this roundtable. So in closing, rather than me talking, we would like to mention the contribution by Adam Tumsi, president of the Intercultural Arab-Spanish circle. So by the 21st of September, we'd love to have a manifesto to commit civil society organizations with human rights. That is what he puts forward and suggests. And the peoples are called to action and are called to respond, and they are responding. Thank you so much for your attendance, both face-to-face and remotely. Thank you also for to the Federation and all the participants.